I wanted to share with you, Mark, some of the areas of the CARES Act that I think will apply to our real estate agents in terms of them applying for relief in the event they need it during this time.
Welcome to another information-packed episode of the Waking Up to Win podcast series. I'm your host, Mark Pessin, Chief Learning Officer at Realty ONE Group. We are proud to have aligned with industry leaders and our own industry experts to provide you messages which are relevant, timely, and shared in a way to empower you, the real estate professional, to experience today's challenges as true opportunity. So today I am here with our own General Counsel, Mr. Alex Mihai. Alex, thanks for joining us today.
Sure, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
Glad that you're able to jump on with us. I know you've got a lot going on, and there's some information that I thought you could share with our audience that would be particularly timely for them, just mainly around the economic stimulus bill that's recently passed and some other questions that I'm sure they have in their mind. So if you would, maybe just talk to us a little bit about the stimulus bill and how that affects real estate agents.
Sure, Mark. No problem. Happy to do it. So just to get right into it, about 10 days ago or so, 12 days ago, on March 27th, the president signed into law what's called the CARES Act. The CARES Act, you've seen it on TV, you've heard about it, I'm sure. It's a $2 trillion stimulus package, really focused on helping small businesses. But NAR's advocacy group, they have a lobby group that has been doing a great job in D.C., making sure that independent contractors, sole proprietors, are also included in some of that stimulus relief. And so because our brokerage, sort of the lifeline of our brokerage are independent contractors, our real estate agents, I wanted to share with you, Mark, some of the areas of the CARES Act that I think will apply to our real estate agents in terms of them applying for relief in the event they need it during this time.
Okay. Yeah, please do. I know people want to hear about that.
Yeah. So the first thing is something called pandemic unemployment assistance. Okay. Pandemic unemployment assistance. And it's generally unemployment benefits that's being offered to independent contractors. So most times you see unemployment benefits being offered to employees that get laid off, that are out of work. This CARES Act provides unemployment benefits essentially to independent contractors. So you would follow basically the same process that a person that's laid off from their job would, a W-2 employee that's laid off. You'd follow the same process they would. You go down to the unemployment office at the state there. You let them know what you do, that you're an independent contractor. And the state would then calculate how much unemployment benefits you would earn. It's going to be based on most likely your prior tax year and the taxes that you filed, the income that you earned, and any sort of maybe additional recent commission payments that were issued to you or something like that. So they can determine sort of what your unemployment compensation would be. Now, the federal government is also offering states that decide to do this, and that is something that you should consider. I should mention that. Not all states will necessarily participate in this program. So what the government is doing is essentially telling states, we will reimburse you, okay? We will reimburse you monies if you provide this sort of an employment benefit to independent contractors. So I don't have a list yet of the states that are doing it. I think most states are going to participate and be involved in offering this type of unemployment benefit to independent contractors, but we should know probably by the end of this week. In fact, this Friday is the first day I believe that independent contractors can apply for unemployment compensation. So I guess that's the first thing. Find out if your state is doing it. So you would go to the website for the state that you're in, and there is a labor department in every state. So look at the state's labor department or unemployment department and see if they're participating in this. Again, it's called pandemic unemployment assistance. So yeah, Mark. So on top of the wages that would be calculated for your, well, I don't want to say wages because that's something different, but on top of the compensation you'd be offered based on your prior pay, the government is also until July 31st offering $600 a week, okay, in addition to your sort of base compensation payment there. So it's an extra $600 a week for, I guess, up till July 31st, 2020.
Okay. No, that's great. Please keep going.
So that's I think good news. So the things that you have to show, okay, to apply for this thing, what do you have to show? Well, one, you're going to have to show that you're not able to work and receive pay due to the pandemic. Okay, so you're not able to work, not able to receive pay due to the pandemic.
Sorry to interrupt you, but does that mean that if they have a recent closing or pending escrows that they would not be eligible, or is there some gray area there?
Yeah, not necessarily. Not necessarily. You're going to, even though you might have a closing now, you may be able to argue, well, yes, that escrow opened in February or January. And since then, the past 2 months, my business has dropped X amount. So they're going to weigh and balance all sorts of things in determining your ability to work and receive pay. And it looks like they're going to error on the side of giving the applicant the benefit of the doubt. That's what the stimulus is intended to do. The money's already been set aside. So it doesn't look like they're going to be extremely thorough in sort of investigating. It's sort of a self-certification. You're just sort of certifying and declaring that this is true, that your business has been affected. One of the questions I think you might have asked Mark the other day when we had this conversation was around essential service. So if real estate is deemed to be an essential service,
right,
does that affect it as well? And the answer again is also no, not necessarily. Just because real estate might be an essential service does not mean that you don't meet the standard of showing, your work's been affected and that your pay has been affected due to the pandemic. So again, you're going to have to.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say that makes a lot of sense because even though real estate is considered an essential service in many states, the ability to transact business is still severely limited.
Exactly. That's very true. And, the government understands that there's been all sorts of restrictions placed by different states, different governors, the ability to assemble. So groups, larger gatherings, social distancing, these all affect our abilities to, for example, hold an open house, interact with a client, meet with a contractor or an appraiser that's at a property. So all these abilities are affecting our ability to work and receive pay. So those are all things that you might want to argue if you're in front of an unemployment officer asking you these questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So a couple other things just to note around this that I think are also important. So your ability to work isn't just affected by the actual business of real estate. It could also be affected if COVID-19 has actually hit your family or your kids are home from school because of this. So those are all very crucial factors as well that would affect your ability to work. So again, if COVID-19, if you've tested positive, some of your family's tested positive, you're caring for them. If your kids are home from school because school is closed or school's on leave still because of this pandemic, that's also something that you would argue. The one thing that, another question that's come up is, well, what if I have what if I'm employed by somebody else? So, some of our agents sometimes have part-time jobs doing different things. If you're receiving compensation from someone else, or even if that someone else is giving you some type of, paid benefit, so sick leave or you're on vacation with them because they've maybe furloughed some hours for you, whatever it is, you would probably not be able to qualify for any sort of unemployment assistance. And that's just generally how that rule is applied. So even if there's no COVID-19, you can't get unemployment benefits if you're somehow employed or on sick leave or receiving some benefit from an employer.
Okay. But if they're an employee elsewhere, then in theory, they could apply for unemployment as that employee, but not necessarily as an independent contractor.
Yes, that would certainly fit. Okay. That is very true.
Okay.
That would certainly fit. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Again, it's called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. NAR has done a pretty good job, Mark. I would direct some of the listeners to NAR's website. They've done a good Q&A on this subject, but I think it's going to be something that will be helpful. Again, I think the first day that you can apply is this Friday, April 10th, I believe it is. Okay.
So if they want more information, they can go to NAR's website and it should have all the details for real estate agents and independent contractors.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the actual application you can find online. You're going to do this through the unemployment office in the state, and that's where NAR is going to direct you. But if you have sort of want more information or want to read it for yourself, I would go to NAR's website. They do a good job on the Q&As.
Okay. And then just to make sure that I was clear on what you were saying, it sounds like this is available through the end of July. Is that correct? The funding would be available?
The extra $600 a week that the federal government is offering states to then have the states provide the independent contractor, that's good through July.
Okay.
But the actual unemployment compensation that you would receive, so sort of that's what's going to be calculated based on your earnings from last year, maybe any recent commission checks that you get, or every state's going to have a little bit different formula of how they calculate what your unemployment compensation will be. But that base sort of compensation, I call it a base compensation because the $600 is the extra the government's giving, and that's sort of unheard of. And that's why some states are reluctant to maybe do this, because they're essentially relying on the government to keep their promise to then reimburse them for paying out that $600 a week to these independent contractors. And so that's why there's some hesitation. That's why I say I'm not sure all states are going to participate in this. They should. I think most will. But you will get benefits for up to 39 weeks, which basically takes you to the end of December. So that's your base benefit. That's 39 weeks of benefits. That's till the end of December.
Okay.
So you would be able to receive those benefits till then.
Okay.
I mean, assuming that the whole time you're unable to work and you're affected by the COVID-19 and everything else, you still have to prove those things. Your inability to pay and work. Yeah.
So shifting gears just a little bit, just thinking from an agent's perspective, let's say I'm an agent and I've got some listings on the market right now. Part of my listing agreement, my contract with my client is that I'm going to do certain activities, or maybe I've already agreed as part of my contract that I'm going to do certain activities to help market that property or represent my client. Things like open houses or, showing the property, at X certain hours of the day or things of that nature. What do you say to an agent, or what should an agent be saying to their customer? Obviously, everyone knows what's going on, but so that an agent is fulfilling their obligations to their clients, what would you recommend that the agent have a conversation with their client? Should they amend their agreement? I mean, if there's some things that they could be doing right now.
Mark, that's a great question. And that's like the $1 million question. And that's what everyone's trying to sort of figure out. And one of the things that's made it tricky to really give a clear answer to that is really the first thing you got to sort of do is you got to look at what your state and federal authorities have recommended. So, for example, you have to sort of determine whether your state has a shelter-in-place order. Okay, and you got to know what that means. So, essentially, we have said as a society, our government has said more than us, I guess, but we're respecting what the government is telling us, that in order to stop the spread of this virus, which is our number one priority right now as a country, an effective way to do that is to shelter in place. So many states have said, we agree, and we are going to issue these executive orders through the governor's office that forces individuals to stay at home. Okay, unless you have essential travel, which is grocery stores, hospitals, going to get your medication, whatever it is. So there's that factor. And in line with that is also whether your state is deemed real estate as an essential service. So there's shelter in place, there's essential service. Okay, so the answer to your question, which is a great question, breaks many different ways depending on the answers to those questions. So let's say for instance that their real estate is an essential service in your state. So there's a shelter in place, but real estate is deemed to be an essential service, which I think is true in many states, at least in the states that we practice real estate in here as a corporate brokerage in Arizona and Nevada and also California. So, your office can obviously remain open in that situation. Your office is open, you're able to conduct business, but then so you're able to service your client to a certain extent, okay, because real estate's essential. So you can travel if you need to travel, but you have to follow still. The state is telling us we have to follow the CDC's recommendations. And those recommendations are really based on social distancing, the amount of people that can gather in one area. So we got to still follow those things. So it will affect someone's ability, for example, to hold an open house. Not to mention some of the calls that I've been on, Mark. It's a bad look. And once the media sort of gets wind of it, we had a situation in California. I was on a call with an attorney here last Friday where the press got a hold through neighbors that someone was holding an open house or some sort of function. I don't want to call it an open house, but there was a gathering of the public there. The neighbors called the press and said, "Oh my God, can you believe this? These people, who knows what level of exposure they've had to COVID-19, but there's at least 10 people in that home. This is ridiculous." And the media now is frankly probably tired of writing about COVID-19. They want a different story, and this was their different story. So you don't want to be part of that.
No, yeah, for sure.
So I can't tell you if that, I would say, if you ask me for my recommendation on how people can still assist their clients, number one, you never want to put your client at risk. So you're not servicing them if you're putting them at risk. And that could mean having strangers come into their homes. So that would be putting them at risk. So just have an honest conversation with your client, I would say, about holding an open house or something of that nature. And let them know that the state has put certain restrictions on this. There's a shelter in place order. So even if you might have consumers that can't leave their house to go to your open house because of the shelter in place order. So take those precautions.
That's great. Yeah, no, that's good advice.
Yeah, take those precautions. There's a lot of virtual things, I think, Mark, that you probably know better than I, that agents are doing today.
Of course.
To really get exposure out there. for their clients and continue to market homes. Their real estate is still moving. We know that. We see transactions that are being closed daily. Some that are still being open. So there's still activity there. But I think if you're familiar with sort of the online resources that we have at Realty ONE Group, that's going to help your case a lot more. That's going to help your client a lot more.
Absolutely agreed. So looking at it from the other side of things, obviously we have a responsibility to service our customers, also protect our customers. Some customers I know are coming to us and saying, look, with everything going on, I don't really want people in my house, or I just want to cancel the transaction, or I want to pull my listing. What are the real estate agents' options in that regard to try to respect their clients' wishes, but also adhere to a contract that they have in place?
Another great question. And, I would love to give you a simple answer, but because there's so many things that are unknown, it's difficult. So I would say from a business standpoint, more than a legal standpoint, try to work with your client, because these are tough circumstances. And I know there's agreements in place and people have signed things, and you've got the listing for 6 months and you're supposed to do all these things because the listing says it. And now the client wants something different. They don't want people in their house, whatever it is. Try not to look at it from a legal standpoint where we have, potential breach of contract or something like that. Try to look at it from a standpoint of what's in the best interests of my client. Because at the end of the day, you owe your client fiduciary duties to act in good faith, to act in their best interest. All those things are going to apply and probably outweigh an agreement that was signed pre-COVID-19. So a couple of things you can do. If a client is hesitant about having somebody view their home, okay, but they still want to sell the home. So you're kind of in that predicament where, okay, Madam Client, you're telling me you want to sell this home. I have a viable candidate here that I think is very interested in your house. They need to see it in person though. So one of the options that, we've discussed at Realty ONE Group, Mark, you're familiar with that too. And I think some states are doing is having sort of a health certification, providing that health certification over to the potential viewer of the property or whoever has access to the property, and having them disclose information to the seller about, I would just call it their current health conditions. Okay. So they're basically certifying that they're not experiencing any flu-like symptoms, difficulty breathing, fever, cough, sore throat. They haven't been diagnosed with COVID-19. They haven't tested positive for COVID-19. They don't have a test pending or anything like that. So whatever they want to know, whatever is in that certification, you can then tell your client, the seller, hey, this will put you at ease. The only people that are going to be in your house are on this list that have certified that these things are true. I haven't tested positive. I've been quarantined for 14 days. I haven't traveled out of the country in the last 30 days. I'm not experiencing any flu-like symptoms, including fever, et cetera, et cetera. And you can tell your seller, we'll know exactly who's going to be in there and what their condition's like. That's still no guarantee though. And you're not going to be able to get sort of a legally binding contract that you can enforce in case there's liability to then say, well, these people lied to me and this was a legal binding contract and therefore there's liability. Because it's just really a certification. There's not really any consideration there. There's no money being exchanged to make it a contract. So I would just say in response to the question, Mark, that this is something that I think could be effective to getting a seller potentially a little bit more comfortable with continuing with the seller of their home. And one of the things that's going to stop it is the buyer's inability to view that home in person.
That's great. And I guess the follow-up question to that from my perspective as a broker would be, if I'm asking a buyer to fill out a health certification, there's no like federal fair housing or discriminatory practice there. It's more about just taking precautions because of the current market or the current health crisis.
Yeah, for the most part, I think that's true, Mark, and that's a good point. We're just looking at COVID-19 as a flu, not as a disability. So if there's fair housing really comes to play a lot with disabilities. You can't treat someone with a disability differently than someone without a disability. And as far as I know, the CARES Act has not called COVID-19 a disability. There is one state that I got wind of through some contacts that I have at NAR that has said that the state of Connecticut has mentioned the word disability in the same sentence as COVID-19. So if someone just has a common, if we're just looking at this as a flu that comes and goes, that's not permanent, which is what a disability could be. Sometimes they're permanent, sometimes they're temporary. This is just a flu that comes and goes after 14 days, for example. We can ask around that, just like you would ask someone that you might meet before shaking their hand. Hey, you're coughing. Are you feeling okay? You got the flu? Because if you are, I'm not going to shake your hand. That's society has said that we're okay with those types of questions. So it's not evasive enough where you're really getting into someone's, a HIPAA thing, or in terms of the Fair Housing Act, a disability type thing where you're going to treat someone differently that might have COVID-19 symptoms versus someone that doesn't have it. So I don't know if that answers your question all the way, but for the most part, you can.
No, I think it does.
Yeah. For the most part, you can ask questions around COVID-19. It's a reasonable thing to do. Yeah.
No, and I think that gives our clients some reassurance, like you said, that they know who's coming into their home. Obviously, it's not an ironclad guarantee, and it doesn't mean that person couldn't potentially get sick afterwards. But it's a way for us to offer some reassurance to our clients. The other thing that I see coming up a lot more and more with agents coming to me and coming to other brokers is the request for some type of hold harmless agreement where the buyer and or the seller sign an agreement that if either party gets sick due to exposure from them interacting with each other or coming into a house, that it's somehow going to release the agent and or their client from any potential liability. And I'd love your thoughts around that and whether you think that those are beneficial or really hold any water.
Yeah, good question, Mark. That has come up. It has come up recently. So I've been kind of torn on this one, but I think at the end of the day, I fall on the side of these hold harmless clauses are most likely going to do us more damage than good. So therefore, don't use them. And that's the position that NAR's taken as well. That's the National Association of Realtors, and conversing with their legal team, they've sort of taken the same stance. They have a little different reasoning around it. But, at the end of the day, a buyer that tries to sue a seller or a brokerage for allowing the buyer to enter a house and then the buyer got exposed and then the buyer wants to sue. But here we use as a defense a hold harmless saying, no, you can't sue me because you got exposed. So the way that would kind of play out in my head, first of all, the buyer would have a very difficult time proving where the exposure occurred and that it specifically happened inside that home. So if they can't sort of prove where it took place and that it took place on our premise, then it's hard to prove damages. And then it's like, what's the point? So and then from this standpoint, you almost draw attention to this issue, and that's where NAR seems to have they've seemed to have made some arguments around drawing attention to it in a way that our industry doesn't want to draw attention to this issue. So number one, by putting a form in front of a potential buyer and saying, hey, sign this thing promising to hold me harmless in case you contract the virus during your walk through the house. Or, that kind of draws attention to a buyer, and the buyer's going to raise his eyebrow and say, well, is there something you want to tell me? Is there something I should know? And then it's like, well, no, we don't know anything. We don't know anything about it. Well, then why would I sign this? So it brings that attention to it, which I think then draws attention to the entire industry, because it only takes, like, Mark, a couple consumers that get frustrated about this. It leaks to, some media outlet or whoever it is, or on some blog. And then all of a sudden, you have ABC brokerage that's forcing, good citizens that are trying to follow their states and regulations and restrictions and CDC guidelines. They're just trying to follow those things. And yet we have a brokerage here telling me that I could be exposed and I need to sign this to hold them harmless. Because you really have to say that in your hold harmless. You really have to say, in the event that you are exposed or you may be exposed or one of those things. Well, then that suggests that might happen. And so NAR is sort of taking the position that this is a bad look for our industry to have these sort of clauses. And I've taken the position that I don't disagree with that at all. And I also agree that it would be very difficult for a buyer to prove where they got exposed, what their damages are. So then what's the point, of me using a hold harmless as a defense?
I agree with that completely. I really do. This has been fantastic, Alex. I appreciate you sharing this with us. I know for our listeners, for the agents that are listening in, this is all very timely and stuff that they need to know right now because it impacts their businesses. And remind me again, the date for them to go ahead and file for, if they want to get it's the pandemic. It's PAE. What does that stand for?
Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. It's PUA.
Pandemic unemployment.
And my understanding is the first day that you're available to apply for this is Friday, this coming Friday. But it's going to depend on your state, and it's going to be very state specific. You know, Mark, that some of these states are very much backlogged. There's, the unemployment numbers are astronomical, historic. So the amount of people that are applying for unemployment benefits is really going to delay things, and really might affect your ability to get on a call with someone and have them answer your questions. So I want to say it's Friday, but it could be a week after that the states are actually, from a practical standpoint, able to service independent contractors in their requests for unemployment assistance.
Okay. Well, again, Alex, thank you for this. I appreciate your time for sharing on what you're learning with your conversations with NAR and the other attorneys that you consult with. I think this is extremely valuable to our network and to anyone listening. So I appreciate you being here today. And if you guys have any additional questions, you can definitely go onto NAR's website to try to find out more in your local state to see what their timelines are. But again, Alex, thanks for being with us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
And a big thank you to our growing audience of podcast listeners. Thank you for staying connected to us and to each other. Remember, my friends, by working together, we will achieve greater success faster.